Fight this, Rebecca!
I married Rebecca Sterling 5 years ago, and let me tell you, it was like watching a nature documentary about two completely different species trying to coexist. She came from serious generational wealth. We're talking Hampton houses, yacht club memberships, wine collections that cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of social connections that opened doors I didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, I grew up in Queens, worked construction to pay for community college, and genuinely thought Olive Garden was acceptable fine dining. But somehow we fell in love, or at least I thought we did. Rebecca seemed charmed by what she called my authentic working-class perspective, and I was completely overwhelmed by her attention and, let's be honest, the lifestyle that came with dating someone whose purse cost more than my rent. Her family tolerated me the way you'd tolerate a stray dog that followed you home, polite enough not to kick me, but constantly hoping I'd wander off on my own. Rebecca's mother, Eleanor, would greet me with the kind of smile you'd give something unpleasant stuck to your shoe, making comments like, "How refreshing to meet someone so grounded," in a tone that made grounded sound like a terminal diagnosis. The dinner parties were psychological warfare disguised as social gatherings. Eleanor would accept whatever wine I brought with the enthusiasm you'd show for a dead fish, holding it at arm's length while explaining they'd save it for a special occasion. That bottle never made it to the table. Instead, we'd drink wine that probably cost more than my car payment, while Eleanor regaled everyone with stories about French vineyards they visited whenever we need to stock up on anything decent. Rebecca's brother Jake was even worse, treating me like entertainment for the evening rather than a guest in his parents' home. He'd make comments like, "So you're the guy keeping our Rebecca slumming it," and ask questions like, "What's it like being the poorest person in literally every room you enter?" The worst part wasn't his cruelty. It was watching everyone laugh, including Rebecca. My own girlfriend would giggle along like Jake was performing comedy instead of just being another trust fund hole with too much time and not enough character. But I was young and stupid and convinced that love could conquer class warfare. I told myself Rebecca's family would eventually see past my humble origins and recognize that I genuinely cared about their daughter. What a damn joke that turned out to be. The humiliations only got worse after we got married. Rebecca developed this habit of using my background as ammunition whenever she felt like being particularly vicious, which was roughly every day, ending in Y. At dinner parties, she'd entertain guests with stories about my working-class habits, like they were symptoms of some rare disorder she was courageously learning to live with. "You should see him try to parallel park," she'd tell her friends, rolling her eyes like I was performing amateur comedy. Growing up in Queens, they apparently never learned proper driving etiquette. It's like watching a nature documentary about people who've never seen luxury vehicles before. Her socialite friends would eat that crap up like caviar, making sympathetic noises like we were discussing someone with a debilitating illness. Even our living situation became constant mockery material. We lived in a Brooklyn brownstone that was perfectly nice by any reasonable standard. Hell, it was nicer than anything I'd ever imagined living in growing up. But to Rebecca, it might as well have been a cardboard box under a highway overpass. "I never thought I'd end up living in Brooklyn," she'd complain to anyone who'd listen. "It's so authentic and not in a good way." The phrase working-class habits became her favorite weapon, deployed whenever she wanted to remind me of my place in the social hierarchy. Drinking beer instead of wine, working-class habit. Watching sports instead of attending gallery openings, working-class habit. Suggesting we eat somewhere that didn't require a 3-week reservation and a second mortgage, super working-class habit. Through all of this, Rebecca's father, William, had been watching. He'd been there for every cutting comment, every casual put-down, every moment when his family treated me like something they'd scraped off their collective shoe. And through it all, he remained mostly silent, offering nothing more than occasional polite nods or neutral comments that could be interpreted either way. But there were moments, brief, almost imperceptible moments, when I'd catch something different in his expression. Times when Rebecca would be particularly vicious, and I'd glance over to see William watching me with what looked almost like concern or sympathy. I'd always convince myself I was imagining things because the alternative was too confusing to process. Sometimes, when family gatherings got particularly brutal, William would find excuses to pull me aside. "How are things going with work?" he'd ask. Or, "Are you finding everything you need in the city?" Simple questions that seemed innocent enough, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was really asking something else entirely, like, "Are they treating you okay?" Or do you need help with anything? When William died last year after a brief illness, I expected absolutely nothing from his will. The reading was held at this ridiculously expensive law firm where everyone sat in leather chairs that probably cost more than my annual salary. The oak-paneled conference room screamed old money so loud I'm surprised the neighbors didn't file noise complaints. Attorney Harrison Mills shuffled through papers like he was dealing cards at the world's most boring poker game, while William's final performance played out exactly how you'd expect a rich dead guy's will reading to go, complete with all the family drama and backstabbing you could shake a stick at. Rebecca had positioned herself front and center like she was accepting an Academy Award, those diamond earrings catching every ray of afternoon light that dared sneak through the heavy curtains. She was practically vibrating with anticipation, and watching her was like witnessing a shark circle a bleeding seal, equal parts fascinating and terrifying. "The estate of William Sterling," Mills began in that stuffy lawyer voice that makes you want to check your wallet to make sure he hasn't already billed you for listening, "totaling $16 million in liquid assets, properties, and investments is hereby bequeathed to—" He paused for dramatic effect, because apparently even lawyers think they're running theater productions. "Rebecca Sterling Mitchell." Boom! There it was. The golden ticket handed to the golden child. Rebecca's smirk could have powered a small city as she soaked up the news like a designer sponge. 16 million big ones just like that. Mansions in the Hamptons that I'd probably never be allowed to redecorate. Vintage cars that cost more than most people's houses. And stock portfolios thicker than encyclopedia sets. Jake got his consolation prize. A few side properties worth more than I'd make in 3 lifetimes. He nodded approvingly like some sort of real estate connoisseur instead of a guy who'd never worked a real day in his life. The whole room was buzzing with that particular brand of excitement you only get when rich people are dividing up even more money. Distant relatives were calculating their Christmas gift budgets, and everyone was mentally redecorating whatever piece of the empire they might snag. Then came my moment in the spotlight. After watching everyone else cash in like they'd hit the lottery, Mills finally called my name. "And for Michael Mitchell," he announced, and I swear the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. You could practically hear the collective intake of breath as everyone leaned forward, probably expecting to hear about some massive inheritance that would finally legitimize my presence in their precious bloodline. Instead, Mills reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single dusty envelope. One measly envelope that looked like it had been sitting in a drawer since the Clinton administration. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a butter knife and serve at a dinner party. The laughter that erupted was sharper than broken glass and about as welcoming as a tax audit. Rebecca's friends, who made hyenas look like diplomatic ambassadors, practically fell out of their chairs giggling. Even the stuffy old aunts, who usually looked like they'd been sucking lemons, cracked smiles. Rebecca leaned over, her breath smelling like the expensive champagne she'd been nursing since we arrived, and whispered with all the warmth of an Arctic breeze, "Don't get too excited, honey. It's probably just a thank you card for marrying up." Her voice dripped with that special brand of condescension that rich wives perfect like it's an Olympic sport. But something felt off. The lawyer wasn't laughing. Hell, he wasn't even smiling. Instead, he was watching me with this weird intensity, like he knew something the rest of these clowns didn't. His eyes held something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Something that felt almost like understanding mixed with maybe just a tiny bit of anticipation. The envelope felt heavier than it should have when he handed it to me. Not physically heavy, the thing probably weighed less than a slice of pizza, but heavy in that way that makes your gut twist and your brain start asking questions you're not sure you want answered. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, trying to ignore the continued chuckling around the room. Jake raised his glass of wine that probably cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month. "Hey, maybe Dad left you a cleaning job at one of the mansions," he suggested, because apparently being a trust fund baby doesn't automatically come with humor that isn't mean-spirited. The crowd ate it up like it was the funniest thing since someone convinced people that pineapple belongs on pizza. I stood there playing the part of the good sport, nodding along like their jokes weren't landing on me like punches from a heavyweight boxer, but that envelope in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my jacket. The afterparty was even worse. Rebecca threw what she called a celebration of life for dear old William, but what it really was an excuse for rich people to get hammered on top-shelf liquor and compare bank account sizes like they were in some twisted measuring contest. Rebecca was in her element, floating around like the goddamn Queen of England making royal rounds. She'd changed into this black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my first car, working the room harder than a politician during election season. Every few minutes, she'd throw her head back and laugh at something one of her equally vapid friends had said, making sure everyone within a 50-foot radius could see just how delighted she was with her newfound fortune. Her favorite game became, let's mock Michael's working-class habits, which she'd turned into regular dinner party entertainment. She'd tell guests stories about my authentic background like she was revealing state secrets. He still shops at Target, she'd announce, not because he has to anymore, but because he actually prefers it. Isn't that precious? The worst part wasn't even the jokes. It was watching Rebecca eat it up like dessert at a 5-star restaurant. My own wife, the woman who was supposed to have my back, was leading the charge and making me look like a complete joke. She'd nod along with their comments, add her own little digs, then pat my arm like she was consoling a disappointed child. But while Rebecca was busy performing for her audience of soulless parasites, my hand kept drifting to that envelope in my jacket pocket. Every cruel joke, every casual humiliation, every moment of public mockery just reminded me that somewhere in that dusty paper, William might have left me something these a-holes didn't know about. When we finally got home to our Brooklyn brownstone, and yes, it's our place, even though Rebecca never lets me forget her daddy's money paid for it, I was running on about 3 hours of sleep and enough emotional damage to fuel therapy sessions until the next ice age. Rebecca spent the entire ride home planning her new life as the Queen of Manhattan, rattling off plans for yacht parties and Hampton House renovations like she was reading from some rich witch playbook. I'm thinking we gut the master bedroom completely, she'd said, not even bothering to look at me while scrolling through her phone, probably already shopping for furniture that cost more than most people's annual salary. I just nodded and made appropriate sounds while driving, because arguing with Rebecca when she's in full planning mode is like trying to reason with a hurricane. Pointless, and likely to get you destroyed in the process. The second we walked through our front door, past the designer everything that screamed, "We have money, but no actual taste," Rebecca disappeared upstairs, probably to start researching which socialite magazines she could get herself featured in now that she was officially loaded. Finally, after what felt like the longest day in human history, I was alone. I poured myself 3 fingers of cheap whiskey I kept hidden behind the fancy bottles Rebecca insisted we display for guests, because God forbid anyone think we drank anything that didn't cost at least $50 a bottle. Settling into my favorite chair, the one piece of furniture in this whole place that I'd actually picked out myself, a beat-up leather recliner that Rebecca constantly threatened to donate to charity. I finally pulled out the envelope. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind of stationery that probably came from a company that charged extra just for using their name. William's name was embossed on the back, in fancy script, that looked like it had been written by angels with expensive pens. My hands were shaking like I was performing surgery instead of just opening mail, but I managed to tear the thing open without destroying whatever was inside. What I found was a single sheet of paper that matched the envelope, folded once with the precision of someone who took correspondence seriously. But it wasn't what I expected. No long letter explaining his decision, no heartfelt goodbye, no apology for his family being a collection of human garbage disposals. Just 3 things that made my brain do a complete system reboot. A bank account number that looked like it had been written with the world's steadiest handwriting, the name Swiss International Bank, printed in small official letters, and 1 handwritten line in William's unmistakable script. "This is for my son-in-law, who has shown true character." I read that line about 15 times, each time thinking I'd somehow misunderstood what it said. Who has shown true character? Not who married my daughter or who seems nice enough. This sounded almost biblical, like something you'd hear in church if you were the kind of person who went to church and didn't spend the whole service wondering if God was taking requests. My throat felt like I'd been swallowing sandpaper. For years, literal years, I'd operated under the assumption that William thought of me as something between a mild annoyance and a necessary evil. The guy who'd somehow convinced his precious daughter to settle for less than she deserved. I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table, the same beat-up Dell that Rebecca constantly mocked because it made noises like a dying vacuum cleaner when it started up, and waited for the ancient machine to wheeze its way to life. The Swiss International Bank website loaded slower than molasses in January, probably because our internet connection was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Eventually, I found myself staring at a login screen that looked more official than anything I'd ever had reason to access. I typed in the account number with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else, all shaky and uncoordinated, like I was entering the combination to a safe containing either eternal happiness or photographic evidence of my own stupidity. The next screen asked for additional verification. I had to enter my full legal name, date of birth, and answer a security question that made my heart skip about 3 beats. What is your relationship to the account holder? The drop-down menu had options like spouse, child, business partner, and right there at the bottom, like William had specifically requested it, son-in-law. Not daughter's husband, or unfortunate family addition, or that guy we have to invite to Christmas dinner, just son-in-law. Like it was a title that meant something, like it carried weight and respect. I clicked on it before I could second-guess myself into paralysis. The loading screen that followed felt like it lasted 17 years. My ancient laptop was making sounds like a garbage disposal trying to process a bicycle, and I was half convinced the damn thing would give up and die right before I could discover whether William had left me enough money for a decent lunch or enough money to buy a small country. Then, the account summary loaded, and my brain pretty much blue-screened like a Windows 95 computer trying to run modern software. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe a decimal point had gotten lost in translation. Or maybe the website was displaying Swiss francs instead of dollars. Or maybe I was having some stress-induced hallucination brought on by too much whiskey and not enough sleep. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes like a cartoon character, and looked at the screen again. The number was still there, glowing at me in crisp digital font. $127 million. I refreshed the page because that's what you do when your brain can't process the information it's receiving. Maybe the website was glitching. Maybe someone had hacked the bank's servers. Maybe this was all an elaborate prank orchestrated by Jake and his frat boy buddies to make me think I'd hit the lottery before crushing my dreams like bugs under designer shoes. Refresh. Same number. Refresh again. Still the same goddamn number. I refreshed that page so many times, I'm surprised the bank didn't flag my account for suspicious activity. But no matter how many times I hit that button, no matter how hard I stared at the screen, the balance remained stubbornly, impossibly, life-changingly the same. $127 million. To put this in perspective, Rebecca had inherited $16 million and had spent the entire evening acting like she'd just been crowned queen of the universe, planning yacht parties and mansion renovations based on her measly $16 million inheritance. Meanwhile, William had quietly left me nearly 8 times that amount, hidden away in a Swiss bank account like some sort of financial Easter egg that only I knew existed. But wait, it gets better. Below the account balance was a folder icon labeled Sterling Legacy Private. When I clicked on it, because at this point, why the F not, it opened to reveal a collection of files that made my already spinning head start rotating like a carnival ride. There were documents that looked official enough to frame, PDF files with names like Property Holdings Confidential and Offshore Asset Management and Investment Portfolio Executive Summary. Each file name was like a breadcrumb leading deeper into a financial maze I was only beginning to understand existed. The first file I opened was a property deed for something called Sterling K Estate, located somewhere in the Bahamas. According to the document, it was a private island covering roughly 180 acres, complete with a main residence, guest houses, a private airstrip, and a yacht dock. The estimated value listed at the bottom made me choke on my whiskey. $42 million. But buried deeper in the digital maze, past all the financial documents and property deeds, I found something that made me stop dead in my tracks. A folder labeled Personal Correspondence, Michael Mitchell, that contained scanned copies of handwritten letters. Letters that William had written but apparently never sent, each one dated and filed away like he'd been keeping a private diary about his thoughts on his son-in-law. The first letter was dated just 3 months after Rebecca and I had gotten engaged, and reading it was like getting punched in the gut by a ghost. William's handwriting was precise and careful, and his words hit me like a freight train carrying emotional devastation. Michael, the letter began, I find myself in the unusual position of writing to someone I barely know, yet feel I understand better than my own children. Today I watched my daughter mock you at dinner for pronouncing bruschetta incorrectly, and I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of myself 40 years ago, before this empire hardened me into someone I'm not sure I recognize anymore. Holy crap. William had been watching. Really watching. All those times I'd thought he was just politely ignoring the family circus, he'd been taking mental notes while I was getting emotionally waterboarded by his loved ones. The letter continued. You remind me of who I used to be before wealth became my identity instead of just a tool. You work for everything you have, you value loyalty over appearances, and you treat people with respect regardless of their bank account balance. These are qualities that seem to have skipped a generation in my family, and I find myself wondering if perhaps you are more deserving of this legacy than those who simply happen to share my DNA. There were more letters, dozens of them spanning the entire length of my relationship with his daughter. Each one was like a time capsule of moments I'd forgotten or tried to forget, but that William had apparently filed away as evidence of my worthiness. The time I'd helped Eleanor with her coat even after she'd spent the entire evening making snide comments about my background. The time I'd driven Jake home when he was too drunk to function, even though he'd spent the car ride insulting my car, my job, and my general existence. You sacrifice without resentment, one letter read. You give without expectation of return. You endure humiliation with dignity. These are not common traits, especially in a world where people believe their bank account balance determines their worth as human beings. But the letter that really broke me was dated just 6 months before William's passing, written after what had apparently been a particularly brutal family dinner where Rebecca had decided to regale everyone with stories about my adorable working-class quirks. I have made a decision, William had written. Rebecca and Jake believe they are entitled to this fortune because of their bloodline. But entitlement is not the same as worthiness. They see wealth as a right rather than a responsibility, a toy rather than a tool. You understand something they never will. That true value comes from character, not from the number of zeros in your bank account. The letter continued. You have endured years of treatment that would have broken lesser men, always maintaining your integrity and kindness, despite having every reason to become bitter and cruel. You work multiple jobs to support a wife who views your efforts as inadequate. You smile through insults that would send most people into rage, and you never once use your connection to our family for personal gain. Jesus Christ. William had been paying attention to everything. Every slight, every humiliation, every moment when I'd bitten my tongue instead of telling his family exactly what I thought of their behavior. He'd been building a case for why I deserved something better, something that would finally put me on equal footing with the people who'd spent years treating me like their personal entertainment. But there was more. Hidden deeper in William's files was evidence that made my blood run colder than a penguin's A in Antarctica. He'd compiled what could only be described as the ultimate insurance policy against his own flesh and blood. Folders containing bank statements, credit card records, and transaction histories that revealed Rebecca and Jake had been systematically embezzling from Sterling Industries for years. The first bombshell was a folder labeled Rebecca Financial Irregularities, containing evidence that my darling wife had been living a double life that would have made a mob accountant proud. While I'd been busting my A, contributing to household expenses and thinking we were partners building a life together, Rebecca had been systematically draining money from the family business like it was her personal piggy bank. We're talking serious money here. Hundreds of thousands in consulting fees for work that apparently consisted of showing up to board meetings hungover and complaining about the coffee. There were expense reports for business trips that were really luxury vacations with her girlfriends, spa treatments categorized as client entertainment, and designer shopping sprees listed under brand development. But Rebecca's amateur hour embezzlement was nothing compared to what Jake had been orchestrating. William's files on his son read like a masterclass in white-collar crime, complete with forged documents, shell companies, and financial schemes that would have impressed the guys who brought down Enron. The most damning document was a detailed breakdown of something called the Miami Project, Jake's brilliant plan to embezzle $1.8 million by creating a fictional real estate development in Florida. He'd set up fake construction companies, hired non-existent contractors, and even created elaborate progress reports for a luxury condo complex that existed only in his imagination and on paper. Reading through these files was like watching a nature documentary about financial hunters in their natural habitat. These people didn't just feel entitled to wealth. They'd convinced themselves that rules, laws, and basic human decency were things that applied to other people. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me that William hadn't just been collecting this evidence for his own amusement. He'd been building a legal case, complete with correspondence with forensic accountants, meetings with FBI financial crimes investigators, and preliminary discussions with federal prosecutors about potential charges. The old man had been planning to burn his own children's lives to the ground, and the only thing that had stopped him was his own end, which left me sitting in my study at 3 a.m, surrounded by enough evidence to send my wife and her brother to federal prison for the next decade, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do with this nuclear weapon William had handed me. Over the next few weeks, as Rebecca went completely insane with her inheritance, I found myself facing an impossible choice. I could take all this evidence straight to the FBI and watch Rebecca and Jake get perp walked out of their lives in handcuffs, or I could just disappear with my $127 million and let them keep their stolen money and delusions of grandeur. Rebecca had immediately started spending her inheritance like money was going out of style, hiring contractors to gut our Brooklyn house and making plans to move to the Hamptons full-time. "Now that I have real money, I don't have to pretend your working-class habits are charming anymore," she announced over breakfast one morning, not asking for my opinion, but stating her new reality like she was reading a weather report. Her cruelty reached new heights as her bank account grew. She started throwing dinner parties specifically to use me as entertainment, inviting her new socialite friends over so she could mock my authentic background like I was a performing monkey. "You simply must meet my husband," she'd coo to whatever collection of Botoxed vultures had gathered in our living room. "He's so genuine. He still drives the same Toyota he had when we met, even though I've offered to buy him something more appropriate." The breaking point came when Rebecca fired our housekeeper, Sophia, a sweet woman who'd been with us for 3 years, and sent most of her paycheck back to her family in Guatemala. "I can't have someone so unrefined working in my home anymore," Rebecca announced, like she was discussing the weather instead of destroying someone's livelihood. "Now that I'm moving in proper social circles, I need staff that reflects my status." Watching Sophia try to maintain her dignity, while my wife explained why she wasn't sophisticated enough for the new and improved sterling lifestyle, was the moment I decided that some people don't deserve to keep their stolen money or their freedom. I spent the next week organizing William's evidence, like I was preparing for the trial of the century. I made copies of everything, organized it chronologically, created detailed summaries that even the most overworked federal prosecutor could follow, and put together packages that would make the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit cream their pants with excitement. Bank records, forged documents, email correspondence, recorded phone calls that William had apparently been making for months. It was a prosecutor's wet dream, wrapped up with a bow. The beauty of William's investigation was that he'd done all the heavy lifting. He'd hired forensic accountants to trace the money, private investigators to document meetings, and had even recorded some of his own phone conversations when Rebecca and Jake had incriminated themselves. I sent comprehensive packages to 3 different FBI field offices, along with letters explaining that I was the executor of William Sterling's estate and had discovered evidence of ongoing financial crimes. I kept my identity out of it as much as possible. The evidence spoke for itself, and I didn't need to be the star witness in a federal trial that would drag on for years. 4 days after I mailed those packages, the crap hit the fan in the most beautiful way imaginable. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Brooklyn reading the morning news when the headlines started appearing. "Sterling Industries executives arrested in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme and FBI raids Hampton estate in financial crimes investigation." The news reports were like Christmas morning for anyone who'd ever been treated like garbage by rich people. They had footage of Jake being led out of Sterling Industries headquarters in handcuffs, looking like someone had just explained that money couldn't actually buy your way out of federal prison. His usual smug expression had been replaced by the kind of panic you see in small animals when they realize the thing chasing them is bigger and faster. But the real masterpiece was watching Rebecca's world implode in real time. Her bank accounts were frozen faster than a popsicle in Alaska, her credit cards were canceled, and her precious Hampton house renovation was shut down mid-demolition. The contractors who'd been kissing her suddenly started demanding payment up front, and her socialite friends disappeared like roaches when someone turns on the lights. Before I disappeared from their world forever, I had one final gift delivered to Rebecca's lawyer, a note on William's personal stationery with the same message he'd left for me. "This is for my son-in-law who has shown true character. I've been living quietly in Costa Rica ever since. using the money to run a foundation that helps working families fight wage theft and carnivory landlords. Every dollar I spend helping people feels like giving the middle finger to everyone who ever told me my worth was measured by my bank account. Rebecca got 8 years for wire fraud and money laundering. Jake got 12 for his shell company schemes. Their appeals were denied 6 months ago. Sometimes their old associates try to find me through intermediaries, probably hoping I'll bail them out financially. But I learned something important from William. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. The foundation keeps growing thanks to William's investments, and I could probably buy a small island if I wanted. But I already have enough. I have my self-respect, meaningful work, and the satisfaction of knowing that karma sometimes gets help from Swiss bank accounts. William didn't just leave me an inheritance. He gave me the power to choose who I wanted to be instead of accepting who others thought I should be. And sitting here watching the sunset over the Pacific, knowing I helped bring down 2 people who thought their wealth made them untouchable, that's worth more than any amount of money.